Well, hello again. We're going to be looking at the books of 1 and 2 Kings this week and next week. And as they were being written, as they were being read the first time round, the question that was being asked was, where did it all go wrong? What happened? Where did it all go wrong? See, at the start of 1 Kings, David's son Solomon is king. He's on the throne. It's brilliant. All the promises of God seem to be coming true. They've got land. They've got people. They've got blessing. But by the end of 2 Kings, the kingdom is divided. The land has been invaded by people who've taken the Israelites away to exile. Where did it all go wrong? And that's what we actually learn in 1 and 2 Kings. And to help us understand what's going on, I've got a map here for us to look at. And on that map, you'll see the whole of Israel. This is the kingdom that King Solomon ruled over. So let's put the crown there for King Solomon. And he ruled really from Jerusalem down in the south there. So Solomon is king, and he's given great wisdom by God. He rules really well. He gets really rich. His people get rich, and people come from all over to come and see him and come and see how great God is. And Solomon builds God a temple in Jerusalem. The temple is where people can come and worship God. It's where they can come and ask God for guidance and help. It's where they can come and ask God for forgiveness when they've done wrong. And so things are great. But then it all starts to go wrong. See, Solomon, rather than just having one wife, he marries lots and lots and lots of women. They're all from the countries all around Israel. And those women worship different gods. And so Solomon, instead of worshipping the God of the Bible, the God who saved them, the true God, he starts worshipping other gods, the gods of his wives. He starts worshipping what the Bible calls idols, false gods. How do you think God feels about that? Well, it makes him angry. God has warned his people again and again and again not to worship other gods, fake gods, but to worship him alone. He told them all the way back in Deuteronomy. Remember when we did Deuteronomy? He told them what would happen if they worshipped other gods. Things would go wrong. Things would go badly. And that's what happened. After Solomon died, there was a rebellion. And the people in the north said, we're not going to follow Solomon, and the south. And so the kingdom of Israel was split in two. You had the people in the north, and that became known as Israel, and they had their own king. And then you had Judah in the south with their own king. Now, remember the temple, that's in the south in Jerusalem, isn't it? But the king in the north didn't want all his people going down to the temple in the south. So he said, this is what I'll do. I'll make my own place of worship. And he set up 2 golden calves. And he said his people should worship there, to worship the golden calves instead of God at the temple. They're worshipping idols again, aren't they? Oh dear. And so after that, things got worse and worse and worse. There was lots and lots of kings, one after another. And in the north kingdom, how many of the kings followed God properly? None of them. None of the kings followed God. They didn't worship God alone. They didn't get rid of all the idols. They didn't keep God's rules. None of them were good kings. There were 20 of them altogether who were bad kings. They even rejected and tried to kill God's prophets. God sent prophets, is a prophet like Elijah, to come and warn them, to say, turn back to God, turn back to the Bible, worship God alone. But they rejected the prophets. They tried to kill them. Things are pretty grim up north. In the south, in Judah, things were slightly better. So 8 of the kings did all right. They weren't perfect, but they did all right. They tried to follow God. They got rid of some of the false gods. They tried to keep God's rules. 8 of them did quite well, but 12 of them were just as bad as these kings in the north. They rejected God. They wouldn't follow him. We're going to hear the rest of what happens next week. But what can we learn from kings so far? What can we learn from all of this? Well, the big problem really in kings is idolatry. People not worshipping God as the only one. People not worshipping God as he says they should worship him. And it's really important that we worship God as number one, isn't it? That's what Solomon, he starts worshipping God as number one in the temple, like God says, but then he gets distracted, he gets led astray, he worships other gods. And sometimes we can be a bit like Solomon. Maybe God starts as number one on our list, but he keeps getting moved down the list. Other things get put in above him. Maybe football gets put above God, or being popular being put above God, or getting good marks gets put above God, or looking good becomes above God. They start to become number one instead of God. And when that happens, they become idols. It's a bit like setting those things up to worship, like they did with those bulls. And so we all need to say sorry to God for that. We need to come to God as he says. We need to ask for his forgiveness. And we need to ask that he'd help us put Jesus as number one in everything we do. Because at the end of the day, that's what's really important to God. And that is what's best for us.